Oh, yeah. Somehow my dog just broke down the door. He's like, I'm coming in. You're not gonna do anything about it, Dad. Dad, what are you doing? What are you doing without me? Oh, excuse me, guys. Trying to decide what I want to do. Do I want to do Crash 24/7 or want to switch it up a little bit? It's a tough question. Armory. What did I get in the armory? Baby, you yelling at me? Oh. Why are you yelling at the dog? That's what reminds me. I forgot my full upgrades. This is a weapon drop. Let's activate Pro. Let's activate. Where does activate Pro? Activate Pro. Activated field upgrade. Okay, so you can select the second one, and you can switch which one you want. EMP drone? Does that sound good? Should I use the EMP drone, or should I use something else? I can always like switch between them. I should do this. Switch. Okay. So I haven't been using it right. I mean, I haven't been using it this whole entire time. Rough. It's so easy. It's just breathing in. It's like put that in like a little bit, you know. It's a bit. I don't know what I want to do. I've gone without one. So I think I changed something there. Ooh. Aim walking movement speed. Nice. And it gives you mobility. Don't mind. I am Batman. I wheeze at the sign of your life. Ooh, troll, nice. Laser is visible to enemies though. You know what? Whatever. We'll do it. I'll give up. I want the best of both worlds, but I'm not gonna get the best of both worlds. You know what I mean? Let's try Crash. No, you know what? I wanted to practice. I've been wanting to practice. Game setup. Let's do Atrium. Team Deathmatch? No, I'm do Gunfight. Whatever. We just do bot setup. We do, 2 friendly bots, and then make them hard. Actually, making veterans. You guys think I'll be able to do this though? That's the question. I was playing with Splenda, puppy, and you're getting our bots hammered. But I'm gonna do one warm-up match and then we'll go into actual matches after this. If anybody wants to play something else, let me know. I got Monster Hunter. I wanted to try the new Dragon game I got, but the game's broken. For some reason, the devs didn't actually fix the settings, sound settings. Sweet ginger ale. Why is he just standing there? I was like, completely confused for a second. I was like, why is he standing there? Yo, my jugglers just went everywhere. Am I not with anyone? I thought I added bots to my team. The actual? You guys are supposed to be veterans. And if they find you, the freaking lights are on site. Eesh. Oh gosh. Someone shoot me. Shoot me right now. Like, you're not really safe anywhere where you hide on this map. You know what I mean? You just have to be, like... This is one of the worst gunfight maps they made, in my opinion. It's such a small area. Look at me. Look at me. I'm a dork. I'm a dork. I'm a dork. Hold on. Sean is playing too with his friends. Nice. So we finally got Call of Duty Modern Warfare or something like that. These guys are going hard. With aim. I can't even aim. Apparently, I'm not allowed to play this game anymore. Yeah, because apparently I can't aim. I probably need to just take the sensitivity down a bit. Speak of how you don't know. Sean wants to message me. He was supposed to call. He never called. Wait for him to call. Excuse me. I'll add the sensitivity as well. I don't know. I've been liking the sensitivity high, but maybe it's too high. They're like running around looking for me, and I was just standing there the whole entire time. It wasn't crowd mode that got me. It was Captain Hook. Nice. Chill out, will ya? Find out my sense. Maybe they fixed the sensitivity in the game and I just didn't notice. I've been playing with like high sensitivity on my Zoom this whole time. I feel like when I'm like this, it just, I don't know. Oh, smack dad me. I was hoping I was playing with another bot, but apparently not. I'm just getting my butt kicked. That's what I'm doing. Like this is what you guys paid for, right? This is the content you wanted. This is what you came for. I was hoping that this would resolve itself a little bit, point itself down. I got 3 kills. I don't even know when I got 3 kills. I was sitting here talking. This game setup. Bot setup. I seriously thought I set it for 2. Oh, so, okay. You can only set it for 1. That's why I messed myself up. So much. Alright, one more round. One more round where I actually do decently. Watch, the bots are all gonna kill themselves, and I'm not gonna be able to kill anybody. Hundo online. Wait, what? I don't know. Look at that, guys. Look at that zoom. No gun. Oh, that's the overtime flag? I never even you don't even get to that point where in this do you ever need that overtime flag? Oh, dude. What the actual... They're like... Look like they're running down all the way. Like, just down sight. Aim down sight the whole entire time. That's just how the bots move. So like, let's go guys. Ready? Let's run. This is my aim down sight speed. Right? Aim down sight speed is so fucking slow. Oof. Yo, how are they killing me so easily, bro? I don't know what this bot's doing. Guys, will you help me out? Freaking lost right now. Freaking lost. Lost in my mind. Don't know what these. Maybe we should just done one bot. Just one bot for the life of me. Are you okay? You stop scaring yourself? I mean, that's what happens when you don't look up.
Shut up. I'm just reading Glenda.
Terrible. I'm getting killed by bots.
Well, close for you.
I know, right? I feel like I'm moving through mud for some reason. Well, that, like, and the bots, like, run around, like, with, looking like they're down sight the whole entire time. Like, they're, like, aiming down the sight as they're walking. Like,
my headphones should connect to your, PlayStation, right? PlayStation 4,
Yeah.
they use the splitter?
yeah. Well, you don't need a split. Like, you need a splitter?
I don't know.
You don't need a splitter for the
You think it'll work this week?
Yeah, it's just a normal 3.5 jack.
Okay. This is making sense.
Why are you playing on PlayStation with this? Okay, go ahead.
Love you.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, he is. Respect the dog. Yoop. I didn't know I was still playing. Oh. How the hell did he hit me? Yo. I don't want to play against bots anymore. They're so cruel, dude. So cruel. Oh, I guess you can shoot through that? Okay, that's interesting. I'm still trying to figure out all the secrets of this damn room, alright? These bots are like, here, let me take the time to fucking murder you to death. Oh, yeah, I forgot I had those. We actually won this match. I don't understand why Thighs, my computer buddy, decided to once and all actually do something worthwhile. Like, I'm just gonna stand here, because I know they come around the corner. Alright. Take that. Oh, I have a stem. Give me a stem. Well, at least I know I'm okay with that gun. You see me stem myself, and then see me shoot him in the head. It's so, oh, dude, I still have to go through all these rounds. That's how bad this is. Oh. Apparently, I just suck. Boom. You know, it's just shooting at the wall. Gun's OP. Can't handle this gun. Can't handle myself right now. Guys, I gotta leave. I gotta leave this place. Look, the bot did more kills than I did. Let's see, I killed Confirm Team Deathmatch, and I guess I will quick play. Quick play. I don't. I love Crash. Crash map was fun to play on, but ran into people who just gun you down. Gun you down. Benny Banner. Do I really want to use it? I don't feel like I want to use it. Well, it'd probably be good to use it actually. There we go. It's used. It's used and abused, guys. Don't forget the name. The man who raised you from nowhere. I don't know who that guy was, but Sam over here closing doors. Might be a little tired. It's a short stream, man. Sneeko hopped on and said hi, pretty much, and then just left. Jew boy boss. Ross. Jew boy boss. Interesting. Should have put sexy Lyoko. That would make better sense. 666. Oh, did I forget to? No, it doesn't matter. It's mostly. These are my channels always very mature. This guy's at 74 already. Ooh. Ooh. Guys, wish me luck. Wish me luck. I need all the luck in the world right now. All the luck in the world. I like how I muted it, but I was just kind of try to pause it. Ugh, yeah, grass is rain. Grass is rain. Well, I think that's what they call it. I don't remember.
Domination. Capture and defend the objectives. We must control the field. Securing C. Securing Bravo.
Oh, I messed up. Definitely not ready to play tonight. I'm already burnt. I'm already tired. I was really debating not even hopping on yet, so I need some motivational sustenance. Oh, I guess it doesn't fucking help me. Yeet.
We have lost the lead.
Yeet, my brothers. Yeet. Oh, that's right. I can see my laser. Way to go, Ty.
They have two. Retake. We're taking Bravo. Enemy at the launch pad. Enemy personal radar overhead.
Okay. I'm definitely not in the right mindset to play tonight.
Allied UAV overhead. Enemy care package
I
inbound.
was hoping I'll take someone out with that. Thur might be strong.
Stand by.
Strong with the force.
We're taking Bravo.
We're really trying to take Alpha right now?
Laundromat. We captured Bravo. Enemy UAV overhead.
I'm broken. I'm broken inside. I feel like my ability to play this game is mute at this point. Might as well just shoot myself in the foot. That's what I feel like.
Lost Charlie.
Yeah. Shoot me in the fucking foot right now.
We're on Alpha. Stand by. Securing Charlie. Allied UAV overhead. We captured Alpha. Hold all objectives. Keep it that way.
Oh, jeez, Lucky. Well, I've got you down.
Losing C. We lost C.
Can't see them.
Airstrike. Get down.
No,
Allied UAV overhead.
Alright, well. You know what? Guys, this is just weird. My hearing sounds off.
Enemy at the playground.
first kill. Nice. Field upgrade is up. Ready? Nice. Oh! I was definitely taking a jog through Central Park, alright? Guys. Don't freaking judge me. Alright? Oh, crap, okay. What the hell? Why is this allowed? You know how many places there is that similar? You boss! Oh! Oh, I thought I was dead. I'm telling you right now, my teammate's a piece of crap. Oh. Ah, seriously? I can't aim, guys. Oh. Yeah, can't aim. Enemy at the laundromat. Take him. I can't shoot him. So I can't see him. Oh, so we got Alpha. So I gotta switch sides. Ah, yikes. Play more. Play my mind. Play more. I'm just trying to take these power points here. Oh, lag. Oh, fuck. Oh. You could save my life, bro. Save my life. Oh, you seriously taking Charlie now? You're just flipping the spawn all over again, bro. We're taking all the we have all the flags. We have all the flags. It's freaking done, guys. We freaking won this game. Pretty sure he died. Oh, someone probably shot him through the wall.
You're needed at Alpha. Enemy UAV overhead. Allied precision airstrike incoming.
Allied precision strike incoming. We close this place up. Oh, yikes!
Back up at Alpha. Losing B.
Oh.
Securing Charlie.
Alright, there we go.
Personal radar drone ready for escort. All points are out. Give them nothing.
I don't care about stealing it. Everybody's gonna do it.
Care package inbound.
Just try yourself to the world, Ty. It's fun. Oh. You know what? Ah, kitty. How dare you, kitty? You wild talon, you. Ugh. I'm happy with the Corgi camera. Corgi camera's down, bro. Sam, if Sam was here, she would tell you, Sneaka, that. I haven't used the Corgi camera because he doesn't sit around long enough to sit in the camera. Believe it or not. Ah, got him. Can hardly hear you, the volume. Oh. Alright. Hold on a second. I don't know why. How about now? Can you hear me better? Is that better? Yeah, it should be better. Let me know. Alright, is that better though? Let me know. I'm not talking very loud because I've been sick for the past week, so. Way better? Nice. Okay. Alright. Get out of here. Anyways, the Corgi camera's down because Maple's not in here much. So I took it down because of that. Just saves. Just saves on processing and whatnot. Sean was asking me about you guys co-streaming, and I would recommend that you guys got a PC. You guys already have the Xbox and everything. You already sit next to each other streaming. That's good. That's not gonna save you though. That's might frustrate you guys in the end, because if you really want to get serious about streaming, well, we won. Oh, Sandus. Yes, I know Sandus. He doesn't sit there. You don't have to. You don't have to play on the PC. What you do is, if you're gonna continue to play on your Xboxes, you're gonna have to get a capture card for both your Xboxes. Put it in. Hook it to the PC, and you can use the PC to stream out of. So that means the PC is just broadcasting what you guys are playing. So you don't have to play on the PC. You don't have to play on keyboard and mouse. Even if you did play a PC, you can still play with with a controller. It's possible. But anyways, no, you want to get the PC so that you can actually stream quality stream and not be frustrated. As long as you have good internet. Also, you can do stuff like the overlays. You know, like this, like my whole background disappearing. This is a webcam I got from Logitech that does it. But you know, to be able to do other special things, what's a good example? Like being able to switch to this screen, which I need to apparently fix now for some reason because it unfixed itself. Anyways, it's totally different. You know, like I can get on my end screen like this. I could do my just chatting screen. You know, I can do all this, and this is because I have my computer. You can't do that. You know, you can't do this stuff without having a computer set up. The Xbox and PlayStation isn't set up for that. That's why you want to do PC. So, and you can do overlays and stuff. I have an overlay. I don't use it. It's nice, but it's kind of weird now that I've been using this camera. I feel like everything got off-centered. I had to reset some stuff. I don't know. I've been sick, so it's been taking a hold on my mind. Control. No, don't want to tilt it that way. I want to pan it this way. Here we go. Now I'm more in the camera. But yeah, see, this is my overlay, which I guess I can have up. It's not actually that bad with it on. It's kind of weird though, because it kind of if I go like that. But as long as I just sit here, it's not too bad. Where are they at? What are we playing? What are we playing if there's like nobody to shoot at? You know what I mean? Oh. Okay, I got him. That took way longer than it should have. Scared the out of myself too. Oh, yeah, I kind of figured someone was down there. I don't know why I didn't check. Should have known after that one guy came out. But I'm dork. Oh, I got some lag going on. I just threw that in my face! What are we playing? What are we playing if this guy's trying to run around and knife people? What in the actual... That's like infection or something going on. Playing infection? Is that what's going on? You're getting lost right now. It's not infection because usually that's my dead body. Oh no, I had him in a headshot. I'm a freaking nitwit. I don't know what I freaking was thinking about. I did that. What? 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 Whoop. Oh. Okay. Okay. What the hell was that, dude? What the hell was that, dude? That was uncool, is what it was. Uncool. Uncalled for cruelness, man. Yeah, okay. Get shot again, watch. Hey, next time that guy pops up in my face, I'm gonna pop him one. I hate using iron scopes, iron sights, just to be honest. But anyways, how's your day going, Smeeko? I've been enjoying the hell out of COD. And then not getting my ass chewed. Whoa! At least I got that off. Oh, geez, they're all running through there. Why? I better just... I'm just gonna go sit there and just gonna freaking... They're all gonna keep running through the same door. Why not? You know? Oh, no! I had his name! My teammate came running around the corner in the last second. I should get an assist for that. Yo, what are we playing? Is this even Team Deathmatch? What's going on with COD right now? I thought we were playing regular matches, you know? Oh, no! Oh, it's been weird lately. I'm also suffering, I don't know, fingeritis or something. Okay, so now spawn flips. Now I'm getting shot from behind. I don't even care about going back. That guy can go suck my... Oh, that's all I don't freaking care about him. What the hell was that? He threw a grenade there and then landed over there. Oh. I got my revenge. Nice. You guys are missing quality content here, right? Oh no! Dude. Bomb storm. Yeah, I was a nitwit. I admit. I make some dumb, stupid mistakes sometimes. There's times where I could have got away with things, and there's times you can't get away with things, alright? And one thing is not being lazy in this game. Let's see. Oh, dude! That's just messed up, man. I like how it showed me. So I figured out how to do field grades. So everybody's been running through this freaking... Ah, man. That's getting some sad right there. Okay. Somehow the guy was hitting me. I don't appreciate that. Oh, okay, we killed him. Nice. Do we have UAV? We have a UAV up there. Oh. Hopping corners like a crazy mofo. Just cause I can. Oh. Someone's behind me? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know I was peeking out that far. Oh, what? Oh, yeah. Quality content right here. No one's gonna get me. I'm just a little bit of a pea. Okay, Ty. Aim at least, bro? Like, ever hear about aiming, man? Aha, you didn't kill me, but good try though. Nice. Oh. Okay. Let's go 4. Get my grenades back. Run out of too much stuff. I mean, where? Oh. Business. Gotta keep my eye out. Eye out. We lost! No! How did we lose? Oh, no. Guys, help me. Save my life. Actually, I don't mind having that up. I love those corgis. They're cute. They're cute and adorable corgis. Play the game. This guy going through knifing everybody. He legit did not give a about the game, though. And they must have changed the... Maybe they changed the settings. Maybe I'm just that crappy of a player that whenever I play against... They make me up against people. They just put me in crappy lobbies. Oh. Recon. What's the recon one? Snapshot rounds. Oh. So this is the best one. This is the best one you can get. That's sad. Oh. Accuracy goes down. I don't get how you can get better control, but your accuracy goes down. And your range. That drives me nuts. Movement speed is less. What do you mean movement speed? You guys confuse the hell out of me, you know? But I do this, nothing changes? Really? That's interesting. Alright, well. We got another, maybe half an hour, you know. I'm getting off. Wonder if anyone's listening into my conversations on the COD right now, because I forgot to change my options. My audio options. Oh, ooh, we're flying over, alright. That's what I talk about. Flying over, flying over. Can't stop me, cause I'm flying over, flying over. I don't know what I'm doing. What am I even doing? It's team deathmatch, Ty. Oh, yes. Nice. Stuck him. He's probably fucking pissed. I love when I stick people. It's my sticky origins. Nice. Why don't I do this more often? Like, when you capture the high ground, that's... Oh no, he saw me. Should have crouched. Oh yeah, he saw me. There's no good place to hide up there. Like of all the COD maps. Sorry, I just give your position away. Oh, I got an assist for those? Ah, that was harsh. That was freaking harsh, dude. Why were they in the middle of the map anyways? Ah, come on. Who else shot me? It's just this guy, right? Oh, okay, okay. I see, I see. I didn't see the guy behind the rock. That hurts my feelings. Sometimes I'm not, like, mentally here.
Enemy personal radar in the air. Friendly UAV overhead.
Oh, dude, what the actual? What? What? I think there's some lag going on. More brain lag. You guys ever hear of brain lag? No. Okay. I didn't know we had a friendly UAV. My teammate's a moron.
Be advised, friendly precision airstrike inbound.
Teammate is a freaking moron. Oh. Friendly Vito on station. Hey, Bardraki, what's up, man? It's the first time being in the stream. I know I'm freaking in the game right now. I'm about to die. Bardraki, what's going on, man? Thanks for coming in, dude. I'll see you in a bit, man. How's things been? Oh, gosh. Yoded. That's what his name said. His clan name, Yoded. Yodala. But man, how's it going, Bardraki? How you doing? I'm really into the game. I apologize. Short stream today. Freaking dying. What in the actual? Oh, the freaking turret got me. Yo, Bardraki, how's it going, man? How's your day been? It was like a 2-second delay, so I feel like a parent talking to myself over and over again. Freaking darn Bardraki in here up in the stream. The man with the smile. The man with the miles. Oh, jeez, man. Let's get this run on. Let's go. See what else we gotta get, man. I'm good. Just got home from night shift, so now the weekend start. Yes. My weekend starts another time of the day. Not today, apparently. I got an exam tomorrow for school, and then I'm driving in California the same day, so be interesting. Someone's gotta be over there. That'd be kidding me. What do you do for work, Bardraki? Am I saying your name right, by the way? Or am I butchering it? Oh, good try, good try. Oh! But yeah, am I butchering Bardraki? Bardraki. I'm gonna butcher the name all day. That'd be sad. Oh, furry animal. Is that what it says? Is that what it says? Furry anime freak. Furry anime freak. Yeah, man. Welcome to COD stream. Where Ty dies left and right. I wish I was a better COD player. But I'm just you know, a guy named Ty. Just a guy. Just a guy. Oh. Alright, I'll take it. Let life be known that Ty survived that gunfight just now. Someone just shot at it. Oh! Nice. Alright, I'll take that one. Anybody else wants to take some? Oh. I just saw him. No, you're saying it fine. Oh, sweet, thanks. The store manager and retail, not that interesting. I mean, like, are we talking about liquor store? Because my girlfriend works at liquor stores. You'll see Sam. Let me know if you want to see my doggo. I got a cute corgi. I can bring him on stream. I lied. I'm gonna bring him on the stream now. Oh, there goes my phone. I didn't even... Here's Doggo. Doggo on the stream. This is my Maple. My Maple. He's my cutie. Who's a patootie. Woo! He's 11 months. He's gonna be 12. He's gonna be an old man. Right. I still have time left on my double XP. We'll do this. It'll be last match. But what game have you been playing? I'll give you a shout out. I don't know anyone else is in here but Jarky, but I think your streams are freaking amazing, hilarious, and I need to catch them more often. But dogs are freaking amazing. And he's my emotional support animal. Not registered officially, but that's why I have doggos. They give me such life to my life. He's such a stinker though. Yeah, but he's got Instagram. It's called Sir Maple of Hiccups. He even got a command for it, but that's kind of where the corgis come from. I love corgis. What's your favorite dog, Jarky? I've mostly been playing a bunch of short indie games. I just said Indian. Oh, no, I messed that up. That toss was sick. That was a sick toss, bro. Guys, look. Post up on the trash can. Is either gonna notice me here? Oh, getting hurt from... This guy's running up behind me, hitting me, Desert Eagle. I'm like, I didn't even notice. I thought I got hit by the flames. I thought of the car. Take that. You want another one? I'll give you another one. I love boxers, but they're too high energy for you. Yeah. Trust me, if I had a farm of doggos, it would be wolves. It would be hella crazy. They'd be hopping everywhere. Oh. You got him. Oh. Of course, there's another guy by me. But, this is the memeable content you come from. I mean, come for it? I have it. Oh. I'm like, you guys can take him out. Too much going on. Too much going on. There was one running into the building and one running out. I couldn't choose which one I want to go for at first. The scaffold. Yeah. Don't particularly want to go on Mantle Map. Hey, have you played any COD, by the way? Budraki? I don't think anyone plays attention to these lasers. Oh, someone threw something. Nice, I hit somebody. What did I hit him with? I don't know. My love? Apparently, yes. Alright, that should have been 2 kills, but I'm only getting assist. Son of a beep. What does my life come to? Oh, he knifed me. She was great. My old rescue dog was a German Shepherd, husky mix with steel blue eyes. Aww. It's German Shepherd. I love German Shepherds. I wish I could have like a mix. Honestly, that's what it is. Get a mix. Give me a dog big enough to carry all my luggage when I go hiking, but lovable enough to play with me. Oh no! Should have posted up on that one. That's alright. Ty makes mistakes. Ty will get better. I can't go through there. That sucks. Can you get me? Oh, behind me. Behind me. I have not bought the new one. Played a little of the Blops VR mode. What's Blops? What's B-L-O-P-S? Yeet. Yo, these guys are playing this map like pros. Cause he knew someone would be back here. Ooh, someone dropped it off the map. Oh, that's gonna hurt. That's gonna freaking hurt, bro. Is he gonna make it in time? Is he gonna make it in time? Oh, he made it in time. Oh yeah. Just you have to be careful of these cars. They blow up in this map. Oh, someone behind us, right? I don't care, because I'm just gonna keep running. Like the chicken I am. Why can't I get down on my knees? What in the world? You see him? He jumped over me like I was. Black Ops 4. Whatever else the last COD was, the battle that had battle royale. Was that what was that? I can't think of what COD that was. To be honest, I didn't play it because I only liked the Black Ops, and so when they came out with a new COD, I really didn't. It wasn't that big of a deal for me. You know what I mean? It was like fun to a certain point playing COD, and then I think it was I did play the new one. Was it like intermediate work? No, it wasn't intermediate. Freaking, I can't even think anymore. Dude, don't even listen to me anymore. I'm done. Oh, this guy saw me. Maybe, or my own teammate shot at me. I'm like running back here, and there's no promises that I'm actually gonna find anybody. But no, I didn't play the one with the battle royale, so it must have been another one. So I'm thinking Fortnite, but that's not the one you're talking about. Yes, you like that grenade toss? That was amazing. Too bad I can't do that more often. Oh man, I'm getting warm though. Yeah, I've been fighting cold, so hopefully you're doing better than me, Jerky. What's the next game that you're gonna play? Did you ever beat Colossus, by the way? Thank you for coming in. So, how did that guy survive just now? Yep. Should just throw it back, Ty. Just throw the grenade back. Oops. I don't know. These guys are just running around. They're just pwning me right now. I feel like a pwn. We lost. Yeah, that was a great game. Which one was a great game? Lost my soul. I lost my soul. I'm gonna start up Plague Innocence and Colossus. Okay. New Star Wars game soon. Oh yeah, Fallen Order. Yeah, I'll actually play some of that, but I'm gonna play it too. I'm definitely down to play it. I died 12 times. That was sad. But hey, thank you for stopping in. Like I said, it was gonna be a short stream tonight, so I'm gonna lay down and close my eyes a bit and try to live. You don't know which one you're gonna play first, though, so. It's a good question. But let's go. Just chatting screen. Oh, thank you for stopping in. I appreciate it, man. I really do. Sorry my energy isn't all up in there, and I'm streaming for 12 plus hours. I wish. I hope to catch you next time. You come in here and enjoy it, man. You need to sleep as well. Good. Alright. Then we're doing the right thing. Both of us are doing the right thing. I'll see you, dude. Keep it easy, man.